Yeah.
All right, why don't we start? So we'll start at this point. I'm Peter Mason. I'm overseeing the ARPA initiative for DDS. This is a public meeting, so we are recording this. And when you speak, please make sure you introduce yourself each time that you speak. If we have individuals who are listening into this as the public, there is no public questions. If you have any questions on our website, we have a website address that you can send an email to us and we will respond. With that, we will move forward. To start off with the minutes. Did everybody get the minutes? And are there any comments or questions regarding the minutes? Seeing none, do I have I can't lost my memory. Anybody want to say we can approve the minutes? Yes, no?
Motion to approve, Peter.
Thank you. That was it. Motion to approve. Yes.
Katie, second.
A second. Okay, all those in favor, either say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
All those who say no, anybody say no? Anybody abstain?
I'll abstain since I wasn't there.
I'm abstaining as well. I wasn't there.
Okay. Did anybody say no? I didn't see any no's.
Who was
Okay.
who was the second person that is abstained? I couldn't.
Melissa Kreml.
Okay.
Great. Okay, this is Peter Mason. We're going to start with a little change of order. We have our CFO, Scott, is here. And so we'll get right to that in case anybody has any questions regarding the rates, because there was a lively discussion last time. So we have Scott, we invited Scott here. And so Scott, you want to introduce yourself and then we can see what is out there.
Hi, I'm Scott McWilliams. I'm the CFO for DDS.
Great. So, does anybody have any questions for Scott regarding the rates? Kathleen?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Scott, we sent you a pretty detailed email last week, I think, about the fact that our numbers just aren't working in spite of being told that they have to. And so we think there's been some mistake, but absent the template or a conversation, I'm not sure. I mean, we need to set a budget so we can run our operations. And I know that you're really busy, so I'm wondering if there's some time we can go over this with you.
So when you say that the numbers aren't working, do you mean overall, or are we talking about the impact of the wage increase, which is really the only funding that we've received to adjust rates based upon?
Well, I'm talking about, you had said that we shouldn't have any numbers under a 10, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories of service that are well under a 10. And so we have every confidence that this can be resolved, but basically our increase is 8% and we're projecting a $300,000 deficit, and we haven't run in deficit in the last 5 years because we've, of course we've had to, spin dials and move things and stuff like that. It wasn't like it was easy, but we just squeaked through. But we shouldn't at this point have a $300,000 deficit, bottom line.
Yeah, I don't really think that makes a lot of sense. But why don't we set up a meeting where you can go over it with Sean and I and have, so I'm still unsure. Are you saying this is related to the minimum wage and the benefit pool?
No, the wages and the benefits are fine. It's on the service side.
Okay. All right. Well, let me get together with Sean and we'll figure out a time where you can meet and see what we need to do to get to the bottom of it. Okay.
Okay, and then I'll just shoot an email reminder to you on that because I know you got a lot going on.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Barry?
So thanks, Barry, Simon, Oak Hill. Hey, Scott. Yeah, obviously I wasn't here last week, so I apologize, or last meeting, so I apologize, what has or wasn't covered in that meeting around if, Scott, are you here, or I don't know who I should be asking this to be discussing the overall kind of concept of rates and rates adjustments towards how we move the system to transformation, or are you here to be talking about the existing service rates and the challenges that we have with although, I think we all know the amount of money doesn't cover the cost of us providing services at, the higher end with the amount of nursing and OT, PT and all that, and the amount of, one-offs that get denied and all this kind of stuff. So I just want to, are we talking about existing services, or are we talking about how do we deal with rate methodologies for the transformation of the system? I'll
jump in. This is Peter Mason. The question had to do with the recently released rates that came out. That's where Scott's coming from.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's only to deal with existing services. Okay.
Well, can I mean, I don't know if I need to announce myself every time I talk, but this is Scott McWilliams. So, I mean, I think that, this is an ARPA meeting. I think that, would not be customer service friendly to say, hey, we're not going to listen to anything about rates that are, people aren't satisfied with. I think the question is on these existing rates, we really only receive money to the minimum wage increase. No, I think that we all know, sort of the overall concerns in the system. I know that, some providers have historically not received enough funding to cover their costs. And, in these few years of high inflation, when we only get money related to wage increases, obviously, when you have fuel increases and food increases, this is not helpful. And unfortunately, we can't just increase everything we want to increase, right? We have to follow legislative intent. Now, I think we were a little bit liberal in that, we did the wage increases, and it is my estimation that exceeds any of the reported costs that we've had related to that. But, we are certainly reviewing any additional information providers are receiving. And then we had increased services that we felt were consistent with where the department wanted to go in terms of the ARPA ACBS transformation. So, I mean, but, Barry, you and I have talked, I don't know, for the 5 years that I've been at DDS, and I certainly know and understand and hear your concerns. And, I think that we've worked together with the department, and we'd certainly be willing and happy to talk to you, about, what we can do. But ultimately, to sort of fix the fundamental flaws, we probably need an infusion of money that wasn't attached to specific things like wage increases, right?
Right. No, and that's where I guess I was coming from. Yeah, clarifying from the standpoint of the existing services, and obviously, I think DDS considers ICFs to be part of their existing services. The inadequacy of the rates and how everything played out, and I know people know that zero doesn't cover 20% increases for nurses' salaries. So when you get 0% increases on some of the ICFs, doesn't work. But when it comes to how we deal with, a rate structure that could promote transformation, I would encourage us to invite you back for that discussion, going forward.
Yeah, no, I'm, happy to be part of any discussion that people would feel would be helpful. I mean, I will comment on the ICFs. I know the state has been moving slowly on it, and it's like sort of like turning the battleship. But I will tell you, Barry, that I'm working on analysis related to the ICFs, so I don't know what will happen. I do know that the state recognizes that it's a problem, and Oak Hill is not the only organization to identify it. And
Right.
I think that we
Right.
need to have a systematic approach to fixing it. And all I can say is we're looking at it. Like I said, I have no idea what will come of it. I'm just sort of handling the analysis end of it.
Yeah,
So
and
this is
I
Peter
appreciate
Mason.
it.
So hold on, Barry, just for everybody's knowledge. An ICF is an intermediate care facility, and the funding for the ICFs actually come through DSS. They don't come through DDS. And it's one of these strange relationships in that DDS licenses the house, but there are no case managers assigned to ICFs. And the lawns don't apply. The lawn funding piece does not apply to ICFs because once again, this is all through DSS. And so a lot of times where money is given to DDS for its facilities and its programs and supports, that doesn't necessarily correlate to DSS. And so DSS, if they have not put in money for that, may not get money for the ICFs. In years past, it also went the other way where ICFs got money and the DDS didn't get money. So it's kind of gone in this way, but DDS, as I said, licenses them and then they can refer people to those houses. But it's a real strange relationship with those ICFs as to having public health is the ones who maintains the qualifications of the house, DDS licenses the house, DSS funds the house. So it's a strange thing that works. And it's always been one of these things that when it works, it's great. When it doesn't, there seems to be issues, and then it's determining who actually needs to, which agency is the driving force to correct some of that stuff. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Barry, Simon, Oak Hill, I just want to, I appreciate you guys are not the responsible party for the rate issues in this case. And so I'm glad you're doing some work on it. But, the fundamental issue of it being a part of the DDS service network and the state making requirements of increases without any increases in rates is certainly a big challenge.
Yeah, and just this is Peter Mason, that we also have a couple of providers that are not DDS providers, which makes it even more difficult to try to oversee. So
Yeah.
they're a different breed, and I know that they're looking at it, and hopefully something will come out of that.
All right. And then again, for the record, and as Kathleen pointed out, the challenges of our running the programs without any increases in the A and G components now on 17 years just makes it impossible to keep up with the required technology, the required infrastructure that it takes to just run appropriate specialty healthcare without that being included in the rates. Is just it's really hard to do business with the state when they micromanage the rates in that capacity. And I know that's not you that's legislative issue.
This is Peter Mason. Barry, you keep forgetting about the 1% that everybody got about 10 years ago.
1/2, Peter,
My
1/2.
my recollection was that that was actually taken back, with the next budget.
Yeah,
So
that's probably a good recollection too.
yeah, I think we got a half, and we got a half, and they took back a full percent. So
I think Katie, you're up.
Yeah, I guess for me, the discussion of the rates in relation to the ARPA Planning Committee is that there seems to be so much ambiguity for us as providers in terms of what our funding is, what our funding will be, what our funding has been. And it makes it a little difficult for those of us that like to have really tight control over our budgets to then make that leap toward the transformation. I mean, philosophically, everything that's being laid out, we're all on board with it, but we're concerned. I know I'm concerned, and some of my colleagues who aren't on the committee who I've talked to are concerned about making this leap without knowing if our structure is solid. And I think, it goes back a couple of years now. It goes back, and I know it's a lot of it was out of your control with the legislators making decisions about the rates, but for 2 years, 3 years now, we've been giving rate increases and getting benchmark funds, not knowing if it was actually covering the rates, covering the cost of those increases. And a lot of things happened in there with COVID and absenteeism and staff shortages. So it's kind of a moving target trying to do that analysis is, did we cover our cost there? Now the rates are being rolled out and we're being told that it's covering all the benchmark and maybe some more, but as not knowing the methodology as we're looking at our own individuals and the rates and the CSAs for our individuals. I'm in the position that Kathleen is, based on my analysis, based on what I have is information to base my decisions on. I'm looking at a loss. Now, maybe I'm looking at it incorrectly, but again, I think it's the lack of information and the ambiguity around it that is going to hinder us from moving forward with our ultimate goals of the transformation. Anything we can do to get rid of the ambiguity and tie into numbers, we will all be grateful for.
So this is Scott McWilliams. I'm confused by you describing what we've done as ambiguous. Can you clarify?
Yeah, I think when we got the benchmark funds, I don't believe we ever got an analysis that tied into what our real costs were to give those increases. I think it was based on an old rate study and it's been a couple of years, so I don't know that it reflects where we currently are.
No, let me, again, this is Scott McWilliams. Let me clarify. So last spring, we requested information from organizations and most responded where we had a pay period at the beginning of the year and we had a pay period sort of towards the end of the year, pre and post increases. And we, the increase that we provided related to the rates, which we've described in the new cost standards, as being like related to the wage increase, is over. We figured that on, not even on average, that, 8.85 covered around 95% of the reported costs by providers. Now, the difficulty in that, the data that we received was a little tricky to annualize in terms of if we took, for many providers, the costs that they reported us, for one pay period on the state side, we would annualize the pay period by multiplying it by 26.1. Anything like that didn't work for many of the cases. So we had to adjust it and normalize based upon reported salaries and things like this. But what we found, other than maybe 3 or 4 outliers, based upon authorizations, an 8.85% increase covered everybody. And then when we reviewed the numbers, we decided that we would just move the wage increase above any of the reported costs to us, which is where we got to the 10%. So, if you feel that, this is not going to cover it, we do have a template. It does, all the calculations are in it. You can populate it. And if the costs reported don't meet what we've described in the funding, then we can certainly talk about that. I mean, I'll be honest, I'll be very surprised if anyone will be able to substantiate costs above what we provided, because to be honest with you, we already have the analysis for those handful of outliers, and we have found that the reason for, I mean, I'm not saying that these organizations aren't taking losses, they are, but it's not related to the minimum wage increase to 17.25. And like I said, when you look at the language in the budget implementer last year, it's pretty prescriptive about what we can do with the funding. We had analysis that supported us in terms of what the appropriation was, and the language in the implementer ties our hands in how we can provide this funding.
This is Katie Van Zaff again from STAR. Scott, I would love that template. I've requested it 3 times. I haven't gotten it yet. I think that would reduce a lot of my ambiguity if I could look at, I know the decisions are being made on a very broad stroke, but I've got to look at how it's impacting my individual organization.
Okay, we'll send it.
Kathleen?
Thank you. To the topic of ambiguity, we also would like a template. So I think just on the question of whether it's forthcoming or not, that would be an area of ambiguity. And that would help us resolve, is the increase 18 or is it 9? Because what we're looking at is 9. There was a period of time while we were waiting for rates, which was a rather prolonged period of time, and ambiguity ensued for all of us providers during that time. And then, again, to get back to the rates, what we're seeing is just not what we have in writing. And so that certainly, as Katie noted, is a point of ambiguity. So I would very much also appreciate a template.
So
And
when
I
you say
appreciate your interest in chatting about it. I'm sorry.
No, that's right. So this is Scott McWilliams again. When you say, let me interpreted that what you just said is to say that what you're receiving as funding is not consistent with what you have in writing. Could you clarify that, please?
Let me pull up that. I've got a lot of windows opened up here. Let's see. So the bridge funding and the rates as that. So for example, our residential, ISC, IDN are up 25%, but 63% of our business is residential. And I had a frantic call from a case manager 2 weeks ago asking if we'd open a CLA. And I said, well, I might have no CLAs if I'm going to get 8% to fund a CLA, then I may have none in a year. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the other thing is we have, and I think this is something that we understandably would talk about at a different meeting, but the ARC Eastern Connecticut traditionally has had an older clientele. And so we have people who have, 73% utilization is our average, and we have an aging population. And so the targets that people are supposed to meet in some cases exceed the amount of time that when you add personal time and benefits and things, that state employees have to be on the job. And some of these people are just too old and they're just not in a position to show up at 80, 90%. And that's seriously affecting our bottom line. And that's a factor too. And I'm sure I'm not the only ARC that has that issue.
So let me, this is Scott McWilliams again, let me make a clarifying statement. So the average increase for CLA CRS services in this was 15%. If you compare, the rates prior to the increase to now. Now, granted, that varied a little bit from lawn to lawn, but when you look at that, we calculated that the increase due to the wage increase was 8.85%, and we were able to, you know, for targeted services, increase the reimbursement a bit above that, you know, and you know, like, frankly, things like, I mean, we understand that services like IHS don't make up a large percent of your business. They don't make up a large percent of our business, which is why we can increase those rates so much more significantly than other rates, because it just doesn't have that big of an impact on our budget, right? Whereas if we were to do something similar to Group Day and CLA and CRS, you know, frankly, we don't have the funding for that. And the legislature and the governor would need to appropriate specific COLA funding for us to do a large across the board percentage increase for those services.
Well, thanks, Kathleen South for the ARC Eastern Connecticut. Thanks for that. If in fact the rate's 15%, that in and of itself might solve a lot of problems. So, you know, I do look forward to chatting.
Barry, do you have your hand up?
No, left over from before.
Are there any other questions for Scott? Okay, thanks, Scott, for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you for talking to me.
Sure. Okay, we're gonna switch around again. So we'll start with Deloitte. And then we'll go into, if we have time at the end, for the rest of the agenda. But I want to make sure we have Deloitte while they're here to present for us. So if you can introduce yourself, Betsy and Julia, and then go on to your presentation.
Hi, I'm Betsy Bella with Deloitte. I'm Julia Oak, also with Deloitte. Wonderful. Can everyone see the slides? Wonderful.
Yes.
So thank you for having us. We're going to provide a brief overview of the current state assessment, including highlighting a few of the leading practices that it mentions. I know that Keith shared out the report with this group. It's okay if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But if you have, we've also have some time set aside for discussion and questions. Okay. The report was created with the guidance and review of DDS. The purpose of the report is to collect information and leading practices about HCBS transformations in other state IDD systems and in sister agencies in Connecticut to inform design of the Moving On initiative. This includes information on promising practices to service delivery, how to motivate change, and ideas for how DDS can best support stakeholders through the process. Right. So it's a 60+ page report written with a government audience in mind. DDS has chosen to also share it more broadly, which we're really excited about. The executive summary captures key information. It includes a table with considerations and recommendations. The research findings section is the bulk of the report. It has the main areas of research, a table highlighting some of the findings by state. So if you're looking at this 60+ page document and thinking, I don't have time for this, we recommend the executive summary and then the high-level research findings from other states table. Like any research report, the team found far more in the research process than could be included in the report. The report represents the most relevant pieces that really help push towards action and change. The appendix includes the report sources, as well as the waiver definitions from certain services mentioned in the report. As you all likely know, states offer similar services under different names and services with similar names that have key differences. So the residential service highlights section includes services that are similar to or have similar names to Connecticut's shared living or community companion home services. The additional services section includes services that were more unique or otherwise of interest for these efforts. The report focused on 5 states and Connecticut. The states are Arkansas, Delaware, Maine, Missouri, and Pennsylvania. And we've discussed those states and the selection of them with this group before. Just as a reminder, the emphasis was specifically on HCBS transformation because the research is intended to inform Moving On, which is a transformation initiative. The research included looking to see if changes to waivers through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, waiver amendment process would be necessary. A key overarching finding from the research reports is that Connecticut IDD waivers offer significant flexibility to provide supports in individualized, independent settings, like the Moving On program is helping to push for. This report focuses on ways to enhance and offer more choice in these settings based on lessons learned in other states and from some Connecticut providers. This just shows the interviews conducted. In some cases, we met with multiple individuals within an office. There's full interview details in the appendix. We interviewed some folks on this call, and DDS identified the Connecticut partners to interview. These are the categories included in the considerations and recommendations table. We'll share a few items from each on the next slides. This first one, individuals who receive supports as the primary focus. This is a priority for DDS, and a key theme throughout the research is the importance of person-centeredness. Residential supports and employment supports. The Moving On initiative focuses on these two areas. The leading practice categories does focus specifically on employment supports and not day and employment, since there is a push towards employment. Provider engagement. These are pieces around how DDS can partner with, motivate, and support providers in efforts. And from the providers on the call today, we'll be interested in hearing some of your input on those pieces if we haven't already. Assistive technology and remote supports. These were research focused, and this highlights ways people are using them to promote independence and make sure people have the supports they need, particularly in light of workforce shortages that are acutely felt in Connecticut, but nationwide. And 6, payment methodologies. This additional research is actually ongoing into outcome-based payments, but the report includes some information on how states have incentivized transformation and how they look to sustain efforts. So, of the highlighted leading practices for individuals who receive supports as the primary focus. Now, in the document, there are additional pieces in each category. There are also considerations addressing some obstacles, concerns, and things to keep in mind in each category as well. But for today, we just wanted to focus on a couple of the leading practices. Enhanced training for DDS case managers focused on alternative service options and new approaches that result from the DDS Moving On program. So after the development of the report, we did hold the stakeholder input sessions, and this is a leading practice that received a lot of support. It's also one that people were volunteering before it was raised. So this idea of making sure that case managers have buy-in and also have the information they need to be able to support people through person-centered planning with an emphasis on potential transition. And then reviewing and revising or developing additional transition-specific shared responsibility documents. This is something currently in use in the Connecticut Money Follows the Person MFP program. When someone transitions to a more independent setting, they are taking more onto their plate. There are new potential challenges and pieces that might unexpectedly come their way. And so creating a document like this and signing it to take on specific responsibility and share the importance of it across the circle of support helps to prepare somebody better for obstacles or challenges that they might face and have a mitigation strategy in place on how to account for it. Residential supports, it comes back to this idea of Connecticut as a leader, right? So continuing to allow providers flexibility to collaborate with individuals receiving services, and focusing on adoption and expansion of supportive and clustered housing, assistive technology, and remote supports. Of course, of importance to residential transitions is being able for someone to pay for their new home in the community. And so building on and expanding housing voucher programs. When we talk about employment supports, looking more into the availability of remote supports for customized employment and also individual supported employment, developing annual statewide employment goals. In some states, there are even specific goals for different populations. For example, youth of transition age moving out of the high school settings into adult programs. Supporting providers to leverage and expand their networks of business partners. It's hard to find somebody a job if you don't have partners in the community. And then provider engagement, providing non-financial recognition and incentives. In Missouri, they had a program that's been really successful where they were looking to improve their data in terms of who's participating and actually limit the gap between people who've been expressing interest in employment supports and having jobs, and people who are actually receiving supports or have it as a person-centered goal in their plan. And so as part of this, they developed benchmarks, and providers who exceeded the benchmarks received what in Missouri was called a purple ribbon status. It comes out of the county fair system. And when they were a purple ribbon provider, it went on their website. The developmental disabilities group in Missouri created press releases, and then they also held celebrations. And so this helped to create a non-financial incentive. And it also created an opportunity for people as they were looking for providers who to support employment, they could specifically seek out a provider who had demonstrated success based on clearly laid out outcomes and specifically collected data. And then hosting facilitated calls where providers can share updates related to moving on efforts to identify and spread promising purchase and promote coordination. DMAS does this with all of their innovative programs where they create opportunities for people who are participating to come together and learn from each other and move forward together. Under assistive technology and remote supports, providing a trial period for remote supports adoption. We heard in our interviews, and then we also heard this in the input sessions, that people have hesitancies around remote supports. They're nervous about it, but by providing a trial period, it gives that opportunity to become comfortable with it before relying on it more fully. And creating a technology task force. DDS is hiring a statewide assistive technology director, and they have the opportunity to work with a group to develop tailored education materials, and also to, on this task force, include the input of people who actually use assistive technology. And then payment methodologies. As DDS considers talking about things like benchmarking related to data, rewarding outcomes, that's very difficult to do if you don't have accurate, consistent quality data across the board. But as we were hearing in the top half of this call, providers are stretched tight. You have concerns about rates covering what you're already doing, and adding additional reporting on that can be difficult. And so incentivizing and providing payment for some data reporting. And again, these are all just opportunities DDS could pursue. Nothing is set in stone at this time. And then if the Moving On program is really engaging and exciting and has significant measurable positive outcomes, and there is funding available, consider temporarily extending some of the transition incentives. So those are just some of the highlights. Stop presenting. So as we noted, excuse me, it supported the input sessions in January and gathered stakeholder input on elements from this research, as well as the initiative as a whole. And we're currently working with DDS to refine the research based on the stakeholder input, including survey results and meetings with DDS leadership, as well as information we're hearing back from, we're presenting the report to all of the ARPA committees, and taking careful notes on the feedback and input we received from you all as well. And so we're refining this research and input into a specific transformation model. It will highlight routes to transformation. It will emphasize DDS support and tools for providers and other stakeholders for transformation. And then as we move into phase 2, there will be additional guidance documents and training and materials to help support providers as they plan for and move through the transition process. So more details coming soon. As you know, we always keep this group updated. So that was a whole lot of information, and we can always pull the slides back up if somebody wants to look at something, but questions or comments?
Wynn? You're on mute, Wynn.
Thank you. Whenever it's parent, the ARC of Connecticut. This report sounds really, really interesting. Like really, really interesting. When will it be delivered? And is it going to be delivered in stages? What's the dissemination strategy, I guess?
This is Betsy Bella with Deloitte. We thought it had been shared as part of the materials for the meeting. If not, though, certainly it'll get shared afterwards. And I believe DDS is also looking into putting it on their website. It will be delivered as a full report.
Thank you.
This is Peter Mason. Everybody, we did send this out to everybody, so you should have gotten it already. If you haven't, let us know.
Okay. Thanks.
Barry?
So Barry Simon, Oak Hill. I guess before I make my comments, I'm just trying to appreciate the version that was sent out to us. Is that still draft, or is that what's going to get posted?
That's what's going to
just-
be, that's what's going to be posted.
All right. So I am frankly really disappointed with the report from the standpoint of, for me, it doesn't match what I thought we had been talking about in this committee. I can say that, and I appreciate my ARC colleagues. Obviously, the interviews were pretty heavily ARC focused. And from the standpoint of feedback, not being able to see a lot of the concerns that we have voiced, and I believe others have voiced, around the amount of change that DDS needs to be doing as a component of really helping to transform the system, to me, is not reflected significantly within the report. As a provider, I felt it was pretty, there was a lack of appreciation for many of our long-standing frustrations of wanting to transform and change, only to be stymied by the state and the state's inability to embrace transformation towards figuring out how to pay for different services within developing a continuum of care. And I didn't think that it reflected in any sense that the overarching mission of this was to transform the system in a way that allows for more services to more people, making sure the system stays sustainable and reflects what those, how to move into those services, whatever they may be, but have yet to be defined. And then lastly, I would say that from my perspective in reading the document, I can say that it didn't feel at all reflective of our challenges of decades of underfunding as a way to deal with the sustainable system going forward. And I can say, you know, for us to be training our staff and for us to be, you know, all the things that the report talks about, in no way does it reflect or mention, you know, that in our current way that we are configured, there is absolutely no equity in the way the system is dealt with from ensuring that we can maintain staff. So to that end, I can say that, you know, when the state itself is our number one stealer of our staff, you know, it doesn't show that that's one of our challenges that the state has to deal with if it wants to create a sustainable system of care. And then, you know, my, you know, ongoing frustration with the case, you know, and I know you loosely talked about it, but the case management system to me is one of those key components that needs, you know, and should be paid a lot of attention to in this report to be helping to transform the system. When, you know, so many initiatives that we have tried to undertake to help people move from higher levels of care to lower levels of care are stymied by case managers. So so I didn't catch, many of the things that I'm talking about in the report. And I feel as though we've hit on a lot of those things within this committee.
This is Peter Mason, and I guess our instruction to Deloitte was to look at other states and within our state on things that were being done now and what we could then go from there to duplicate. In terms of what's wrong with our system, I don't know if that's what that state analysis was. We didn't go through every other state to see what was wrong with those states. I think it would have been my assumption that that stuff should have been coming out through the stakeholder input. It should have been coming out through the stakeholder surveys. So it's not like it's not to address those issues, but it wasn't. My thinking wasn't that this was going to say everything that's wrong with Connecticut needs to change, but it was to find out the different things that were happening that we could then duplicate, knowing that there are issues with this, what we're doing now, but I didn't think that this report, or I would not have thought that this report was to go and look at all the wrongs of every state and say, you don't want to do this. So I think I'm kind of confused as to where you're coming from and what the direction was to Deloitte.
I thought it was to identify the rights that were happening in other places and the challenges that we are experiencing within Connecticut in order to help us transform our system.
I don't know if the challenges were part of that analysis. It was what were other places doing and within Connecticut that we could kind of duplicate, not. And so that's what the direction that was given to Deloitte, thinking that all this other stuff was going to be articulated within the stakeholder forums.
Betsy Bella Deloitte, adding on to what Peter's saying. So this report, this current state assessment, is an important step of the process, but it's not intended to be the end, right? It includes recommendations, but it's not, this hands over to DDS. DDS picks a couple of things to tell providers to do without any extra support and walks away. This is a step as part of a process. And so as Peter noted, the stakeholder input sessions were held where we did continue to hear many of these challenges and shared, some of these approaches that we'd heard from other states or within Connecticut, and heard from people what they saw as barriers to the implementation of those. And so the current part of the process is bringing those pieces together and identifying, okay, in a dream world, this can happen, but here are the things that come up against it. What's the bridge to help make those pieces? I think those are the pieces you're looking for, right? So here's the challenge. Here's what we're going to do to address the challenge. And here's how DDS will transform as part of the transformational efforts. And that's coming in a future report, right? That is in progress. That's why Julie and I are in the same room today, right? Because it is a tricky process of weaving all the parts together. And so we wanted to come in person to be able to really get heads down on it together. And so I would encourage folks to look at the current state assessment in terms of, as Peter noted, looking for leading practices, evidence-based progress in other states, but it's not intended to be a one-to-one, here's a challenge in Connecticut, here's how to address it, here's what's happening next. Thank you for your comments.
Tracy?
Yeah, Tracy Walker, Journey Found. I was disappointed as well. I was expecting recommendations that were a little more robust. That, you know, I didn't clearly see a, yes, do this. This worked really well in Pennsylvania. Yes, you know, do that. And so that's where, you know, my disappointment in the report came. I mean, there was a lot of interesting information presented, but I didn't really see clear and robust recommendations that were going to launch us and move us forward.
Betsy Bella Deloitte, thank you. Yes, it's when you are looking into, there are lots of interesting things happening in the states. There's no state that's got it all figured out, particularly to address the specific challenges. And we knew that as a potential barrier going into the research. And so they are recommendations for consideration for DDS to explore. We are comparing them in with the stakeholder input, and then the more robust recommendations will be coming out on the other side. And then hopefully in the future, when folks are doing similar efforts, they can look to Connecticut as a model.
Katie?
Yeah, when I look at the interviews, and it does look like in Connecticut, you interviewed for providers, but in the other states, it looks like the interviews were primarily state agencies. Was that a conscious decision not to interview providers in the other states?
Betsy Bella Deloitte, thank you, Katie. It was a couple of things played into that decision. Part of it is the difficulty in identifying leaders in providers in other states. And so, yes, the focus, and then also since the focus is on transformation being led from the state level, it was just focusing on the folks who had led those kinds of transformations from sort of the same viewpoint that DDS has, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Katie Banzep with STAR. That makes sense. I just think there would have been a lot of valuable information from providers from their perspective as to the impact of the transformation that their state agency was going through.
Thank you.
Barry?
So I guess, I mean, if the, you know, the report's done, certainly, and I ask my colleagues to, you know, perhaps give their impression. I will say that the opening felt very critical of the current provider system and didn't necessarily acknowledge the state's role in a lot of the issues that were pointed out in those, you know, in the opening about what, you know, the providers are, what's challenging to us. So again, I don't know, you know, if the input sessions didn't give you, you know, a sense of that, but certainly it talks quite a bit about what providers need or should be doing, but didn't talk, you know, specifically to what, you know, what some of the state issues are.
Betsy Bella Deloitte, thank you for that feedback.
Any other questions, concerns? I'll throw in my 2 cents. In that when I read through that, there were a number of things that really were something that DDS may be able to work on. So one of them had to do with apartment setups in terms of non-reoccurring costs. And they were allowable in the waiver, which we haven't seen that before. So, and we know that's been a barrier for some individuals to move out. So we're now going to explore what that looks like and how other states have done that. And hopefully be able to ease the move for some individuals. We noticed that in Maine, they hired certified employment specialists and they embedded them into the state job centers. So that may be something that we also want to take a look at. We noticed about benefits planning in other states. Now, benefits planning is done here through BRS. And so we may take a look to see if there's a way we can work together with BRS to see if we can have possibly a BRS staff work at DDS that just does benefit counseling, which I think would be valuable. We noticed in Missouri, there was a value-based payment for agencies to submit quarterly employment data. So that may be something that we may want to explore, because we don't get very good data in terms of employment, but if we pay the providers to do that, maybe we'll be able to get better data. There was some shared savings programs for agencies that did remote supports, and seemed to be something that worked through with CMS. So we can kind of try to see if that's something that we could do. And then Missouri also had with remote supports in terms of trying to work small in small doses. So one of the things in my head, I was thinking, maybe what we try to do is to work with some of the CLA and CRS providers to assist them with doing some remote supports for some people within the house that would allow them to have some independence and then also be used through the remote supports. So it's something that we see some things in there that would be able to use to assist us as well. And these are just off the top of my head as we go through this. So Shannon?
I don't know how popular this is going to be right now, given the discussion, but we went through the report in the Individual and Family Engagement Committee meeting. And the thing that I think our group responded most strongly to and really liked was the idea of a ribbon system or some sort of system that would help individuals and families be able to, understand what providers are, where their strengths are. I think people generally feel like there's not a lot of information out there when they're shopping for a provider that, lets them know what other individuals and families think about their supports or how successful they are in providing the supports that they say they're providing. And so our committee across the board felt very strongly that that was a great recommendation.
Thank you. Katie?
Katie Van Zappet Star. Peter, you touched on one of my hot buttons is the benefit counselors, and there's a desperate need, and one in the state isn't going to do it. I would rather in this report think less. I know it's about a state transformation, but we really need to empower the private providers and fund the private providers to have those resources locally. And any place that we can start thinking about, that's why I think it would have been helpful to have interviewed private providers in the states that are having some of this success, is how do we empower the private providers? I could use a benefit coordinator, counselor every day of the week on people who are looking for jobs. And, and we're looking at how do we bring that resource into our organization, not inexpensive to do that. But again, thinking about strengthening the system, we have to strengthen the provider system as well, and not just invest more in DDS, I guess.
No, and I appreciate that. This is Peter Mason. I guess when I looked at that, I was looking at who does it now, and then how do we expand from there. It wouldn't be cost effective to have a benefit counselor in every agency. So how then would we do that in a fashion that would be more regional? I mean, right now we don't have the technical stuff that BRS would have. So, you know, that's why we looked at that, but to figure out how to do it on a more regional basis, you know, that's definitely something that, you know, should be considered. So, you know, just starting the conversation and starting having everybody provide their input into that, you know, that's the, in my eyes, is that's one of the benefits to when this comes out is, okay, we have these, what should we do? How do we move forward? So thanks. Barry, you got your hand up still?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone?
So Barry Simon Oak Hill. So just you know, because you're starting to name some recommendations of, you know, how to improve the system, which is great in the coming.
No. Those were my observations of things that I know we could possibly do. They're not recommendations. They're the things that I culled from that was possible.
Okay. And so I guess running along the lines, you know, I know that you know, one of my bugaboos, you know, the ACT team was mentioned in here. And I don't know whether, you know, that will see more light in the coming report. But certainly as an option that was presented where you can provide services to far more people, integrating into the community with highly complex needs as a promising practice of service delivery where Connecticut could be a standout, you know, in the nation. I got very little play in this report. So I don't know, you know, if your thought is, you know, and I know, you know, that model has been proposed for at least 9 years now. So hopefully it can, you know, get an opportunity to move forward if we're truly trying to transform the system. So I'm not sure how or where that'll get more play. It didn't get a lot of play in the report, but certainly I think, you know, within Connecticut, it could easily be figured out how to pay for it because we already do it in a different part of the health and human service system in Connecticut. So just throwing that out there as an example and a question of how something like that can show up with more attention.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thanks. We'll take a look at that. I will say that it was in there though. So it's moved forward, Barry. It's in.
Yeah, there we go. Yes. So at this rate, I'll be proposing it for another 10 years. Okay.
Anybody else have any other questions? Betsy, I wonder if you can give like a 1,000-foot level of the stakeholder inputs and how that went and.
Yeah, definitely. This is Julia Oak with Deloitte and give really brief summary. So throughout the month of January, we held 6 stakeholder input sessions, prioritizing new voices. So we did our outreach to target those that aren't already involved in our ARPA committees just to get some additional perspectives from just broader stakeholder groups. So of the sessions, we had 2 provider sessions, one for day services, one for residential, individuals and families, similarly one for day and one for residential, and then also met with DDS case managers and staff, as well as the self-advocate coordinators. So as Betsy mentioned, you know, we really were working to gather additional qualitative feedback as well as pressure test some of our findings in the report. And just at a very high level, a lot of the concerns that we heard from folks, you know, weren't a huge surprise. I think the biggest themes were challenges around transportation, lack of affordable and accessible housing, the workforce crisis, as well as the importance of individualization of supports, and the need for flexibility within the system as the needs of different individuals shift and change. So I'm happy to provide more information, Peter or team, but that's sort of very 30,000-foot level overview.
I would ask, because we want to make sure that we get all the information, that taking back what was said here by by the providers, that if you did not hear that stuff in the stakeholder input, whether it would be necessary or possible at our next advisory committee to hear from the individuals on this committee of issues that they feel needs to be addressed from DDS.
Yep, this is Julia Oak from Deloitte, and just quickly for next steps, certainly do that, Peter, and we are taking note of the discussions on the call, and just sort of where we're at after holding the sessions. We have a draft report that's with Peter and team for review, and we're also, another element of that report is the survey results. So there is a survey sent to individuals and families, providers, which we all should have received via Everbridge, and then DDS staff. So the final version of the report will include the findings from those surveys. There's just sort of timeline differences. The surveys closed a little bit later than the report was completed. But we can certainly take note of what was discussed on the call, and we'll share the report, I think, similarly.
And can you tell me how many providers submitted a survey?
I believe we had 35.
Yeah.
35, okay.
Yeah, this is Betsy Bell with Deloitte. And just to clarify, we're asking that in the next session of this group, we collect additional input on DDS challenges, or did you mean the challenges shared today?
What I'm saying is that if this, based on what we heard today, if that's included, those were already included in the shareholder input or the surveys, then I think we should be good to go. But if you're hearing stuff here that's different, then I would then recommend that at our next meeting, we hear some more specifics. So that's why maybe we talk about this afterwards to see how that works, okay?
Perfect.
So I just don't want it to come out that we're avoiding people or we're avoiding any negatives. That's not what this was designed out. It was designed to transform the system. And you know, when the providers that were interviewed, it was, you know, who are the most innovative providers that we should be talking to, and that's where those names came up with. It wasn't, you know, it happened to be the ARCs at that point. But there was also, I believe, NEBA was also one of the ones that were talking. They're not an ARC. So it was not designed about one group versus another. It was looking at more of the innovative piece to it. So, but I don't want this committee to feel that we're avoiding that. And so if we don't see what was talked about here, then we can come back and look at how to make sure we address the issues. Barry?
Yeah, Barry, Simon O'Kill. Yeah, because going along those lines, I would say there are providers who have been proposing really innovative stuff for years that the department has either not been able to follow through on or the state has squelched. So there's a ton of stuff out there that could be happening if innovation was allowed to happen. So that is, you know, if you're only interviewing the people who were able to get things through, but not the people who have been banging their heads against the wall for decades trying to get things through, you know, it's going to be a skewed interview process.
This is Peter Mason. I get that. And what you consider innovative, what another provider considers innovative, it could be up for interpretation. So when you're looking at who actually has been implementing this stuff, then you know that can be duplicated. It's not to downplay any of that, but you know, how you choose what would be innovative versus what wouldn't be. You know, in terms of the act, that's one of the reasons that Demas was contacted. So if there are other things that are out there, I'm quite frankly, I'm a little surprised that we're only received 35 surveys from providers. I would have expected we would have seen more. I would have expected those that were looking for innovation stuff would have submitted it, would have put that down, and we would have then been able to use that. In this particular case, silence is not a positive. As I said, I was very surprised at the low number of that. And just to give you an idea, for the individual and families, we sent out 8,700 and we got 1,700 back. For getting 1,700 back from families was, that's a high number. To get back 35 from providers, in my eyes, is a low number. Now, whether a lot of them showed up at the stakeholder input, hopefully they did, and so they didn't feel they had to, that's fine. But just, we're trying to get the information. So, this is not for a lack of trying. This is not for a lack of trying to steer the report one way or the other. We're doing what we can do to get that information.
So, and I don't know if providers got the implicit message that if you're on a committee, you don't need to be filling it out, because I know that I came away with the message that if you're on this committee, for instance, you shouldn't be going to the meetings and don't need to be filling out a survey.
That was never said about the survey. It was said about the provider stakeholders. But it wasn't said that about the survey. So if that's what people took out of that, that was not supposed to be the message.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if others got that message and how many providers are on committees. But if you're looking for it to happen again, you may want to put it out there that, because of the low turnout, we're asking for providers to be, filling out this survey.
Anybody else have any questions, concerns? All right. Thank you, Deloitte. Let's go back to our agenda. What time is it? We got 10 minutes. So quickly, we'll run through some of the updates in terms of the committees. This is Peter Mason. The Residential Transformation Committee met last week. The bulk of the meeting we talked about was regarding shared housing. And the department has a program called Shared Living, and that's a coordination of providers, individuals, and families. We're still working through we're trying to look at that program and how to better explain it. But what we find is that there's a lot of families interested in what I'm calling shared housing. Individuals who want to purchase a house by themselves and how that would work. And so I presented with that group some of the issues that are involved, such as related party, if the families are going to purchase the house, issues with, hold on, let me just pull that up. Where are you? Issues in terms of if you're living together, what are the rules for that? The lease, if there's a lease involved, some of the other issues that are involved in terms of all that stuff. And so we kind of went through some of that. And one of their recommendations was to see if the department could do something on a broader scale for individuals and families. So I'll be bringing that back to the DDS leadership. So that was kind of where we were for the residential committee. Day transformation, Keith?
Keith Lavalette, DDS. We met yesterday. We actually had Ellen Econs from Demas present to our committee. She talked about the IPS model, the evidence-based model that they use for employment. She also talked about the training that is provided to the employment specialist. It's called 3 Cups of Tea. She talked a little, she got into a little with the BRS and how that works. And then she finished talking about the clubhouses and how Demas works with those. And they're actually kind of transforming their clubhouse system now. And she talked about coming back to the committee and talking further later on in the year. Then we had Deloitte talk about the state review that we just went through.
Great, thanks. Individual and family engagement?
Yes, we met yesterday. This is Greg McMahon for DDS. We met yesterday and Deloitte reviewed both the state survey and also the feedback from the stakeholder groups that were held throughout the month of January. We had some good conversations around those topics and some enthusiasm, as Shannon had mentioned earlier, over some of the concepts and from some of the other states. We also talked a bit about trying to encourage creativity and reduce regulation wherever possible that slows down our ability to be innovative. And we're working on a project of coming up with a clear template for describing each of the supports and services that are funded through the department, so individuals and families can have a clear idea of what services there are and the challenges and benefits of those services. I've talked about that frequently at this meeting, and both Shannon and I have worked on a sort of proposed beginning, very rough draft that we'll be working with McDowell Communications with as well. And Shannon, if I missed anything?
Nope, you did a great job.
For the engagement committee, I'll fill in. So we meet actually tomorrow, but one of the things that we're looking at is the engagement committee's kind of been, it's had a couple of different coordinators, which has kind of really put that communication behind. So we're trying to catch up. Right now we have Princess Russell, who's a case manager supervisor, and then now we're going to have Cress Saccaroli, our our regional director, who's going to be overseeing this. We're looking at, in particular, trying to get more information to case managers and really get them up up and running in terms of all this. And so we're looking at how do we do this on a statewide level, but also on a regional level. So we're looking at trying to figure out some kind of regional meetings that we would have the case managers come and discuss. Because we think they're going to be critical to this whole piece to make sure that they understand what's happening and that they're supportive of the initiative. One of the things that will be done by the communication consultant is that they're going to be developing a quarterly, I don't know if it's quarterly, it could be bi-monthly newsletter that will be sent out to everybody to try to get everybody all on the same page. So in the beginning, we will be mailing them all to families and individuals because we don't have a great database of email addresses. The goal will be over this time period is to have people sign up to be able to do this electronically, but in the meantime, we'll be sending them through the mail a hard copy. And that same newsletter will go to DDS staff and to private providers. So everybody can hear and see what's happening all at the same time. And the idea is that the next issue, which would be sometime in April, will be all around, revolve all around the second phase. So that everybody can see what the second phase looks like. So that's a little bit more than just the engagement committee, but that's kind of what we're looking at. And just as a quick update, we have 26 providers that have put in their initial interest. Some have identified themselves as looking to put in a transition plan. And Deloitte on Friday had open meeting hours for those providers. I believe they had 21 providers. Is that correct? And so those conversations were sounded like those went really well. And Deloitte will be having office hours on Fridays on a regular basis. And providers will then be able to join those meetings, or they could set up a separate meeting with Deloitte to help move them forward. But as of this point, we had one provider put in that was sent back because it was just before the transition plans went out. And so I know the regions are working with that provider to resubmit the plan. And I think we've got 3 minutes to go. So if there are any questions on anything else, let me know.
So
Barry.
Peter Barry, no questions, just a suggestion on the cover of the report. I'm assuming those are stock photos. And I know you have so many photos of, participants throughout the system. So I would suggest you use, your own photos rather than stock photos because it looks stock photo cover.
No, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank you.
night.
Thank you very much.